Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, today I have Edward Korkowski on the line, and he's NDT Level 3 certified and owner of eddycurrent.com. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adam.
All right, so I've been looking forward to this for a while now. I know we met back in April. We're finally recording in May, and we got a lot to cover today. So I do want to get into eddycurrent.com, your site, your vision for the platform overall. We're going to talk a little bit about NDT testing, of course, as well overall. But before we start that, we'll start this episode the way that we start them all, with what we like to call our Mission Matters Minute. So at Mission Matters, our aim and our goal is to amplify stories for entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. That's what we do. Ed, what mission matters to you?
Well, I'm in non-destructive testing, so testing components, it keeps components running, it keeps people safe, it keeps costs down. So it's all about integrity for materials and safety for the public.
Yeah. It's great. Love bringing mission-based individuals on the line to share why they do what they do, how they're doing it, and what we can learn from it. So just to get us kicked off here, how'd you get into NDT testing in the first place? And actually, maybe let's define what that is. I know we've been having discussions, so I've been learning a lot, but I didn't know when we first met, or even a while before that. I know we did some work with Don Booth, who's also part of our community, and that's when I kind of was introduced to the world of it. But maybe start by defining it again a little bit, and also telling us how you got started.
Yeah, I think Don and I actually probably went to the same school up there in Minnesota. It's Ridgewater College. It used to be called Hutchinson Votech, but they had a non-destructive testing program that started back in the early 70s. I think it started off in an old school or an old church or something like that, but it started with just very basic equipment, right? But non-destructive testing is a non-invasive way of testing materials for like wear, cracking, degradation, without damaging the material. So a good example would be if you broke a leg or whatever. I mean, that's a destructive, that's destructive because you break a bone. But when you go to the hospital, they don't cut you open to look at your bone. They do an X-ray.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of non-invasive. Same way, if a pregnant woman goes to the hospital and gets checked out, they use ultrasound to look at the fetus. So those are non-destructive test techniques, and they do non-destructive testing, in just about every industry you can imagine. A very obvious one is like amusement parks, the roller coaster rails, the big rides that swing all over the place.
Yeah.
Power plants, aviation, aerospace, any place that has metal. It's not just metal, you can do non-destructive testing on food. You can do non-destructive testing on, wood and organic matter. They're actually doing non-destructive testing below the Giza pyramids right now because they think there's some big structures underground. So they're using some type of aperture radar from outer space, but that's non-destructive testing also.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's go a step further on this. So maybe now just let's get into eddy current a bit and maybe talk a little bit about that specific type, just so we can build a little bit of a foundation for the discussion.
Yeah, well, when I went to school, we had studied radiography, ultrasonics, liquid penetrant, and eddy current was one of those methods. And I swore by the time I got done with school that eddy current testing was going to be the absolute last profession that I chose. Because it's, electromagnetism is kind of mysterious and the background is very rich and colorful, but all the books and all the literature that's been published on electromagnetic testing and eddy current specifically, nobody really connected the dots well. So you could read a book and go, oh, this is how it works, but it's an old book. Some of what's in those old books still apply, and some of it's been replaced with new technology or, increased learning. So eddy current testing, I swore I would never do it, but when I went on some job interviews after school, I took the job that I got offered in Virginia, and they did exclusive eddy current testing, and they did eddy current testing on heat exchanger tubing in power plants. So I got into it. First I was a platform worker. I was dressing up in the protective clothing and, taking care of the equipment and stuff. But we tested tubes, hundreds and thousands of miles of tubes over and over, all over the world.
And so how do you know, like, is that how you got your foundation? Like, how do you know so much nowadays? Because you're one of the world's like foremost authorities on this. Like, how many years you've been in this business now? Like, give us some of the numbers.
The first company I worked for, I was there for a little over 15 years, and that was a service company that traveled around and serviced power plants. So I
Hmm.
was the vendor that would show up with the equipment, and I would go and look for, flaws in power plants. And then
Hmm.
after I worked for that company for like 15 or 16 years, then I came to work for an actual power company. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like I went from being the worker to the boss, but it's nice to be full circle. And it's a small community of people out there, you know.
Yeah. It's small but active. I mean, talk a little bit about your content creation, like the videos that you create, your YouTube channel. I mean, because you're putting out quite a bit of content.
Yeah, I've been putting out a lot of content lately. It all started about 5 years ago. Chuck Hellier, I refer to him as, an NDT legend or godfather of NDT. He's been around
Yeah.
forever. He's probably in his mid 80s. I actually talked to him just this morning about eddy current, believe that. But
I kind of figured that was it, what you talked about. Go ahead.
yeah, so just pre-COVID, he called me up one day, him and Jim Treat, who's another NDT legend. He passed on in 2023, I believe. He was actually my first boss, Jim Treat. But those two
Wow.
fellows called me up and asked me if I would be interested in making an eddy current training course on video. And
Mm,
I'm like, yeah, that sounds cool. They said, but you got to create all the material. Can't use anybody
mm.
else's material. So I'm like, oh boy, it's gonna be a big, big challenge. But I like challenges, so I signed up for that. And after about 6 months of prep, they flew me up to a studio in New York, and I basically showed up, and I had some vendors send me equipment. I didn't know how any of it worked, and I just sat there for a full week and filmed, under the
Wow.
lights and the cameras and all that stuff. And it actually went pretty well. And then as soon as I got back, COVID hit, and I was actually due to take my recertification exam. It's a pretty tough written test from the American Society for Non-Destructive Testing. It's the
Mm,
ET, or the electromagnetic testing exam. And normally I would go for a week-long refresher training each time before I'd go take the exam, but because of COVID, everything was shut down.
yeah.
So I took out every book. I mean, these are some of the books in my library. I think I
Yeah.
probably have 75 or so eddy current books. Every one I can find, I pick up, right?
Wow.
So I figured I would just sit down and self-study. And then I started thinking about, I go and I pay this, a couple $1,000 every 5 years
Yeah.
to take a class from somebody to teach me more about eddy current. And I thought about it. I'm like, you know what? Why don't I do that? Because like I'm
Mm,
older now and I've been doing it for a long time and I got some schooling with it, so having all the right experience on paper. So I started teaching the electromagnetic testing. It's an exam prep course. I think they call it CPC, certification preparation course. So
yeah.
I started teaching that class for the S&T, so that was kind of cool. And after I made the course for Jim Treat and Chuck Hellier, I'm like, you know what? Why don't we just keep working on this? So
Mm,
I kept developing materials, and I had this, big library. I also did a lot of research in industry databases and research laboratory databases. Maybe we can talk about that in a minute. But I have this huge trove of information that I can pull
mm,
from. Everyone that looked for it and took the time and made the effort could find the same material.
yeah.
But, I looked and I found it. And so I use that to not only create a lot of the stuff that I speak about in like my podcast and stuff, but, part of the reason I went and did all this research is because eddy current is one of those non-destructive test methods where people have opinions, and they'll give you, what they think, what a signal is, or what's causing that. And they never really tell you what they're basing it on, but that's what they think, right? And
Mm,
if they're persuasive enough, they can convince you that their way is right. Well, I got kind of frustrated because I didn't know where people were getting all their background to make decisions from,
mm,
right?
yeah.
So I was always on a quest to find the answers.
Yeah.
That's why I just kept digging and digging and digging. And I'm like, what, this stuff isn't rocket science. It's a lot of pattern recognition. It's understanding, some physics. Even understanding the physics sounds crazy, but if you fall over and you hit your head on the ground, you just experienced physics, right? So it doesn't have to be
Mhm.
all confusing, right?
Mm,
And it's a lot of, it deals with magnetism a lot. Everybody plays with magnets as a kid, so when you start taking eddy current training, they talk a lot about magnetic domains, and
yeah.
polarity and all that stuff. But you play with a magnet as a kid, you got, a good start on eddy current testing.
Yeah. And talk about, okay, so you acquired, call how far back ago you said, but eddycurrent.com. So now, and I want you to kind of like provide some clarity here for me. So you have this amazing domain, you have this platform you're building, you have education, content that you're creating. Let me into your mind a little bit here. What's some of the vision for this big platform you're creating and supporting?
Well, let me first talk about the aging workforce a little bit.
Go for it.
Non-destructive testing is a trade. Like pipe fitters and electricians and plumbers, these are all trades. You go out there, you get a little dirty, you work hard, you use equipment, you got special skills of the trade and things like that. But, as well as I do that, a lot of the younger generation, and I actually had a blog prepared the other day about this, a lot of the younger generation is being drawn to the digital age, I guess they call it, or digital jobs. So,
Yeah.
when you think about content creators, influencers, drop shipping, podcasting, all that stuff, you can work from home and you can be with your dog all day. You don't have
Yeah.
to ever change out of your night clothes if you don't want, and you can probably make pretty good money if you're good at what you do, right?
Yep.
So the industry right now is sort of facing a challenge of how do we get people to come into the business. So one of the ways is to, let people know that it exists, because, before I was probably 18 years old, I'd never heard of non-destructive testing. I
Yeah.
mean, before Don Booth spoke to you, you probably never
I
heard of
didn't
it,
know.
right?
I admit I didn't. Nope.
See, and it's something that happens under your nose all day and all night, probably mostly at night, like
Yeah.
amusement parks, right? They do all that work when everybody goes home.
Mm-hmm.
But so I think my part in this is letting people know it exists, letting people know that, I'm from basic farm country up in Minnesota, grew up, working on farms and stuff like that. I wouldn't consider myself super smart or anything like that, but I've always been curious. I've always been curious, and I wondered how things worked. And, through some of my videos, I think some of them are a little bit funny. I think most of them
Mm-hmm.
are at least somewhat educational. And I can show people, hey, you can do really cool stuff with, these test instruments and make a real difference to people. You can have
Yeah.
a power plant or an airline company that's got some sort of crisis or some event happened, and they don't know why or what happened, and they may call you in to do forensics. So a lot of times you can be part of a solution that makes a big difference. And,
Mm.
of course, if you keep roller coasters safe and airplanes safe and rocket ships safe and
Yeah.
power plants up and running, because, power plants provide electricity to police departments, nursing homes,
Mm-hmm.
hospitals. It's all part of keeping all that infrastructure running and keeping the people safe,
Mm.
and, provide them with the services that they expect.
Man, that's amazing. And to think that it affects so many different facets of our life. But, I didn't even know. You said until your teenage years. I didn't know until, I started working with Don Booth and now yourself. So it's amazing to me to know that this huge infrastructure existed that I didn't even know about.
Yeah, well, your brain's got that thing called the reticular activating system. And that's the way, like when you buy a white car, a white Prius or a white Ford or whatever, then you
Yep.
start seeing them everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're going to start hearing non-destructive testing, eddy current testing, radiography. You're going to hear it on
That's
the
true.
radio, hear it on TV.
I want to talk a little bit about your process because I think it's interesting and maybe shift a little bit here to the personal development side of things because I see books. You're big into books. Obviously, you go deep in subjects because with Eddie Current, you made a career out of it. Like, how do you approach this concept of personal development and really just educating yourself?
I'm looking around for something. You got to stand by on this one, because if I find this thing, it's going to be great. Oh, here it is. I was semi-prepared for this interview.
That's what I
You,
like.
can you read that?
I can. Distinguished Toastmaster. Oh, you're a Toastmaster. That's awesome.
Toastmaster, yeah. So I would say a lot started when I went to Toastmasters, right? So I remember it was about 2010, and I was listening to an audiobook from Jim Rohn. And
Mm,
that's not the sports Jim Rohn. This is like Tony Robbins' mentor, right?
yeah.
And I listened to the CD. I bought some bootleg stuff off of like eBay, and this was one of the mystery tracks that I had, right? And it was called "The Day That Turns Your Life Around."
Hmm.
And I listened to it, it was so powerful, I signed up to go back to school the next day. So I went and got my
Whoa.
undergrad at like 40. And when I was in my undergrad program for energy management, so it was kind of fitting with my career, one of the classes was Introduction to Public Speaking, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things you had to do in that was perform a speech in front of like 10 people. Well,
Hmm.
I was talking to my mom one day about it, and she goes, "Well, why don't you just go to a nursing home? They'll be happy to hear you talk." But I had to find an audience.
Yeah.
It's hard to get 10 people together at work, even if it's work related. So that was out.
Yeah.
So I did some searching online and I found out about Toastmasters, and I just showed up one night with my camcorder and a speech about non-destructive testing. And
What?
and I met the club president. He goes, "Do you know where you're going?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to Toastmasters." And he goes, "What, are you going to give a speech?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Are you a member?" I'm like, "No." What just happens, they had a cancellation because you have to sign up for Toastmasters
You do.
speeches, right? You got to prepare.
I earned my CC, so I earned my competent communicators way back
10
when. Yes.
speeches. I got you, buddy. 10 speeches. You had to work with a manual. You had to do
Yes, yes, yes. So I
body
think it's
language,
hilarious. It's
vocal
amazing and
variety.
hilarious. You showed up with your speech day one. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Go ahead, continue.
So
This is a great story.
so he goes, "So you're not a member and you want to give a speech tonight?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You got your checkbook?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You're on, speaker number one." So I went in there, and then, I had my camcorder, but they had a videographer for the night. And he goes,
Oh
"No, you don't
wow.
have to worry about that. I got it." So I'm like, "Well, I really need the video." And he goes, "I'll give it to you after." So I went through there, my knees were knocking, dry mouth, all that stuff, and at the end of the meeting, he goes, "I got some bad news. I didn't turn my camcorder on." So I
Oh
had to do the whole thing over, but at least I had a practice round in.
yeah.
So I did 3 speeches there just to, fulfill my class requirement, but I started to enjoy it so much that I
Mm,
stuck with it. And eventually I became an area governor for, region of South Florida. And when you're area governors, you go around to different businesses and you teach them how to start up Toastmasters clubs in their companies. So
mm,
we would go to like GE, and we went to G4S, a security place. We actually started a Toastmasters club at the company that I work for now. And so it's really good to, we went to Scripps, so that's a place where you got all these doctors, brilliant doctors that are, searching for cures for cancer and all this stuff. And they're brilliant with medicine, but you put them in front of a group of people, man, and they're just as nervous as the next person.
yeah, for sure.
So it was fun to deal with those folks, and see, I would say that was a really good thing to do because, one of the blogs that I have talks about, and all my blogs have a lesson, by the way. I don't write them
Mm,
just to write, but one of them talks about the confidence that's required when you're a leader in the non-destructive testing business,
mm,
because you're inspecting components for a client, and if it's an unfortunate case where you find something wrong and you have to deliver this news to them,
hmm.
and they're on a budget and a schedule, and they got to get the plant back online, and you give them unpleasant news, they ain't going to want to hear it, right?
That's true.
And you better make a pretty convincing argument if a lot of repairs have to be done,
Hmm.
if they have to replace components that they weren't expecting, because that's big emergent unplanned work.
Yeah,
And if you go in there, looking at the ground and you don't really sound so sure of yourself, even if you are,
yeah.
they're not going to get the message that you know what the heck you're talking about. So you better not only know
Man,
what you're
that's
doing, but
I
you got to
never
come
made
off.
that connection. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I said there's no room for milk toast in eddy current. Those are my blogs. I have fun
That
with those
makes so much
blogs.
sense. So, wow.
Yeah.
So, Toastmaster, I haven't thought of that organization in a while. I'm a big fan of it. I mean, I can think about earlier in my career when I was going through my CC and doing those initial speeches, like it made a difference. I was younger and I was working. Some of the people in that particular group out of Scottsdale, Arizona, were like really tenured speakers, and some of them were really, really good and like spoke professionally. And they would go there and they had earned their like higher level like certifications, and they were like really sharp. And I, looking back now, I was very, very fortunate to have such a good group that took the time to give feedback and to make sure that I got better along the way. What are you digging for now, man? I see you
You
over
know
there,
what's so
Ed.
funny? I swear to God, I did not plan this. I was just looking through my drawer, and you know what? I kept my blue ribbons, right?
No way, get out of
I've
here.
got over
That's
75 blue ribbons in this pack here. And this,
Wow.
every time I went to Toastmasters, they give out ribbons
Yeah.
as a way to say, good job. Even if you're not that good, they go, good job, because I want you to come
Yeah.
back and practice next week. But
Yeah.
I was so passionate about it and had so much fun with it. I think that's why I got a lot of blue ribbons, because I like telling stories.
That's awesome. I love
And some
this.
of them are good stories too.
Well, Ed, first off, this has been great getting to know more about you, getting to bring this to my audience. And so now, like you said, particular activating system. We all heard about what eddy current is now. Now we're all going to be noticing it. So I'm glad
Oh,
that you're
good.
working hard to bring awareness to the industry. And I just have to ask, I mean, you got a lot going on. What's next? What's next for you? What's next for the website? What's next for your vision?
Well, I talked about the digital economy and stuff a little bit and talking about the, content creators.
Yeah.
And there's a couple guys out there. There's one guy out of Texas that he's been making, eddy current videos for years. And the guy's
Mm,
super smart, he knows it
yeah.
all, nobody knows it all, but he knows a lot. And I look at the videos, and nowadays, if you don't have good audio and good video and,
Yep.
solid content, you don't have anybody's attention for more than 2 seconds.
That's
So
true.
I'm like, I'm going to be an eddy current content creator, so
Yes.
I have a lot of material that I have fun delivering to people that want to
Hmm.
learn more about eddy current testing. And there's a lot to learn. That's one of those things where you never learn it all. I mean, I learned like 4 things this morning.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
So this is like every single day it's a new challenge, it's a new thing to overcome. But then what's cool for you on this content creating side of things is it's a new video, right?
Yeah. I do have to show you one thing here real quick.
Do show. I know you got gadgets back there. I'm like,
Well,
what is this stuff I'm looking at?
so, steam generator tube in the United States, there wasn't a good commercially available instrument for tube testing until the late 70s, right?
Hmm.
This is a heavy one. This is an EM 3300. This came out in about 1980, I guess. It's an
Yeah.
old analog. It's an old
Oh my
analog
gosh.
tester, and it actually still works. But you see, I got the side panel off because it needs a couple transistors, and they're kind of hard to find these days. But I want to bring it back. I want to bring it back to life. But that was very primitive by today's standards because it did very
Hmm.
basic testing. And when you follow how the technology evolves, a tester that's this size weighs what, a couple pounds,
Yeah.
can do so much more. It's like your old rotary phone versus your smartphone, right? Not only are they smaller, but they'll do 100 times, the
Hmm.
applications quicker. And today they make these things called array probes. See, I'll show you this real quick. When the guys are inspecting airplanes, they got little tiny pencil probes like this. You see that?
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
scanning around the windows, looking for tiny cracks. You can
Wow.
imagine how time consuming that is, right?
Wait a minute. That's how big for an airplane?
Just for, the smaller the crack you need to find, the smaller the coil you need.
Oh my gosh,
You
that's man
can't look for little tiny
for
cracks
everybody
with
that's
great big coils.
listening and for everybody that's listening at home that are listening to audio only and you're not watching this on our YouTube channel or can't see the video, Ed is holding up something that looks like a half of a pencil, not even a full pencil.
That
And he's
coil is probably 2 millimeters.
and the coil is 2 millimeters. So this thing is small. And you're telling me that this is what they use to test on airplanes. Wow.
They go for little tight areas where they could be very, very small cracks, little cracks. You ever get a little crack on your windshield?
Yeah, yeah.
What happens to it? It starts to
It
propagate
gets
and get
bigger.
bigger, right?
Yeah.
And that's when the top of your aircraft can come off like a sardine can, right? So nobody wants that.
Man, don't tell me that. I just got back from Miami yesterday. I don't.
So, well,
Now when I'm sitting in the plane, Ed, I'm gonna be thinking about, man, I hope whoever tested this plane was good at what they do. They better be watching Ed's
you
content.
know, it's the safest way to travel, and it's because the aircraft get routinely inspected with non-destructive testing. But the latest thing, I shouldn't say it's that late, but people are moving more and more to array probes, and
Mm,
this flexible ribbon here can have hundreds of little coils in it. So instead of having
yeah,
one coil, you've got 100. So
yeah.
now you can scan a whole area, and because it's so big and it's got so many coils, you can always have complete overlap, 100% coverage, and your probability of detection of flaws is a lot higher, so you'll have less
Mm,
misses. So
mm,
they use array probes for tubing. They use it for, ship hulls. eddy current, certain types of eddy current, like pulsed eddy current, can go very deep, whereas conventional eddy current testing is for pretty thin materials.
Mm.
Like this is a rotating scanner, and this is a probe that has a small coil in it, and this rotates. So when they take all
Mm.
the rivets out, they'll scan the holes with a rotating scanner to look for cracks.
Whoa. Whoa.
There's all sorts. This is a rotating probe that they inspect tight radius U-bend tubes with. So as it's
Whoa.
going in and out, it's also spinning at like 500 RPMs. So it's
Dang.
complex, a lot of sophisticated equipment is used. It's a very interesting field, a lot to keep up
Man,
with.
it is. It's like you're playing with a bunch of gadgets over there. Seems
All sorts of
interesting.
gadgets.
I get it.
Yeah.
Well, man, this has been fun, and thank you for sharing some of the I shouldn't say toys, but instruments that you're
Yeah,
using to keep us safe out there. But to me, it looks like a lot of fun too. I'm like, man,
it
that looks
is.
fun. That being said, if somebody wants to follow up, start following your content if they're not already, I know you have eddycurrent.com. What about the YouTube channel and everything else? How do people connect with you?
Well, first thing, my email is easy to remember. It's
Mm.
ed@eddycurrent.com. And the YouTube channel name, because you can't have any like periods in the name,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
Eddy Current DOT.com.
Yep.
So one thing that's nice about the YouTube channel is basically what I've done is make playlists of every company that sells eddy current equipment.
Mm.
And most of those companies have made videos for all of their test instruments and equipment. So if you
Yeah.
just go to eddycurrent.com, you can see everybody else's stuff,
Yeah.
plus
That's
some of
great.
my stuff.
That's awesome. And for everybody listening, just so you know, we'll definitely put the links onto the in the show notes, so you can just click on the links, head right on over and check out Ed's site and also his YouTube channel, of course, and his other content. Speaking of the audience, if this is your first time with Mission Matters and you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe or follow button. This is a daily show. And Ed, you're holding something up there. I want you to talk about that for a moment before we sign off, because I know that's also available at your eddycurrent.com website, I believe, right?
Yeah, it's a little plug, but I feel passionately this is one of the best tools that any eddy current technician can have in their toolbox. This was developed by the government back in the late 60s. Guy by the name of Russell Brown, actually. But it's an old analog slide rule that you can use to calculate things like what test frequency should you use for a certain thickness and type of tubing.
Mm.
And everybody today likes black boxes and calculators and Excel sheets and all that stuff. But the more you use this tool, your intuition for what you expect the answer should be, it starts to
Mm.
develop. And after a while,
Wow.
you become a wizard with this little thing, and you kind of got to hide them because people will steal these. But I've got them. I've got plenty of these. I think I don't know. I've got enough, put it that way.
That's amazing. And for everybody listening again, we'll put the links to eddycurrent.com in the website and on the show notes, so you can click on them and head right on over. And Ed, man, really, it has been a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Adam. See you later.